Hello everyone, just thought I'd do a quick channel update. I was working on my commentary for the Freddy Farkas video, and part of that, spoiler alert, I was talking about how Sierra was probably thinking of what other types of games have we not covered before when they decided to do Freddy Farkas. And that led me down a rabbit trail of thinking, oh, you know what? They have covered a lot of stuff. And then that further brought me down to thinking about how my friend Sean, back in the day, and I had thought, hey, let's think of a game that Sierra has not done yet. Like one of the quest games, like, you know, they've got King's Quest, Space Quest, and all these games. But let's think of one that they haven't done yet and write it out and, you know, live the dream of a 20-year-old that we were back then, as you can see from the gray hair in my beard. That was a long time ago. And so what we came up with was a game called BC Quest. And so you're probably thinking, well, there's a comic strip called BC, which deals with cavemen. And then there's also a game called BC's Quest for Tires, which is from the comic strip. So it's BC's apostrophe S, so you know, it's like a possession type thing. Then the game is called Quest for Tires. Well, we didn't know about that at the time, that there was this game called BC's Quest for Tires, and the irony that it would play out a little bit later. So, the truth of the matter, this goes all the way back to 1990 when my friend Sean and I were dreaming that we could work at Sierra, and that was like our end goal. Because at the time, Sierra, like I said, was creating these incredible games, and they were on top of the world at the time. But for those of you who may have stumbled on this channel on accident and you're like, what is this guy talking about? I was looking for something else and now this guy's talking about it. What is this Sierra thing? So let's go into a little bit of Sierra's history. So first, Sierra was founded by Ken and Roberta Williams, as we all know. And if you don't know, well, sit down, you're about to be educated. Ken was kind of like the technical side of it, and Roberta was more the creative side of it. And they both loved you know, the idea of these games at the time were pretty much just text adventure games. So there was a game called, for example, Colossal Cave that they were both a fan of, but it was strictly just text. Ironically, here we are just a few years ago, they actually remade Colossal Cave. Ken and Roberta did under the new company that they formed. I myself had also developed a text adventure game, which never got famous because I never really did anything with it other than upload it to, at the time, AOL. It was a game called Final Soul, which I have played on my own channel. So when I hit 1,000 subscribers, thank you all, I actually went through and played my own game, and it was fun to replay that game and revisit what I had created. But this isn't about me. Well, it is, but right now I'm talking about Sierra's history. So Roberta wanted to create like a game with graphics in it, and Ken was like, I don't think that's really possible. But Roberta was pretty persistent about it. She's like, I think we can do it. I think we can make kind of like a text adventure game that has some graphics. And so what they ended up creating, it was very basic, very primitive, was a game called Mystery House, which I also recently played on my channel. So you can also check that out on my channel and see. It is very, very primitive, and it has, similar to my own game, because you're limited to what you can type, it has a lot of places where it's hard to figure out what you're trying to do, because it is just text adventure, and you're like, I'm just trying to get out of this room. How do I get out? I'm hitting west and east, and I can't exit the room. And it might have to be like, you have to type open door, go south, or whatever. So Mystery House was a difficult game to move through, but they created it. They did it. They created a game that had both graphics and text. And perhaps not ironically now, is you may or may not have heard that there is another company that is remaking Mystery House with like full-on 3D, like modern day graphics. So that's kind of cool to hear as well. If anyone would like to pick up Final Soul and make a new version of it, let me know. So in 1983, IBM contacted Ken Williams and said, hey, we want you to develop a game for the PC Junior. And so basically Ken, Roberta, and the team that they developed created something known as Adventure Game Interpreter, which basically got later known as AGI, and that was basically the game engine that they used for those early Sierra games. So in 1984, Sierra made the first King's Quest game with that engine for the PC Junior, which, tragically, it did not do well on the PC Junior. But when Tandy released the Tandy 1000, which is the same computer that I had back in the day, if I remember, I'll try to post a picture of me standing next to it, dressed as Leisure Suit Larry. And there's more to that story as well, which maybe I'll talk about in this video. Anyway, so when Tandy released the Tandy 1000, King's Quest 1 actually took off. It actually sold very, very well. And so this basically was the start of Sierra. Sierra now had a game that was making them money and something that they could do with. So they started pulling together a team. So they recruited Lowe, who we all know made Leisure Suit Larry. They recruited Mark Crowe and Scott Murphy. They created the Space Quest series, and then they got Jim Walls to do the Police Quest series. And that was just like the beginning. Like, this is just scratching the surface, because there was a King's Quest 2 and a King's Quest 3 and Police Quest 2 and all these sequels that were coming out. And as this was starting in 1988, Sierra made a new game engine called the Sierra Creative Interpreter, which later became known as SCI. And so this allowed for basically the text parser and EGA 16-color graphics to basically work. And King's Quest 4 at that time had been released on the AGI build, but because King's Quest is the flagship of Sierra, they also released King's Quest 4 on the SCI. So it's basically the same game remade into the newer engine. So I thought that was pretty cool. But as time went on, Sierra didn't stop there. So they recruited Lori and Corey Cole to create Heroes Quest, which later on got revamped to Quest for Glory, due to a copyright issue with Mattel, who owned a board game called Hero Quest. So Heroes Quest was renamed to Quest for Glory. Few people, myself included, because back then I was collecting Sierra games as they came out. I actually have a copy of Heroes Quest, the original box, where it had Heroes Quest as the name, not Quest for Glory. In 1990, Sierra looked pretty much unstoppable, right? So they're knocking out games. Everything's a success. King's Quest 5 comes out with a brand new, they called it the SC1 engine, which now included 256 colors, which previously was 16 colors. It would go on to sell something like 500,000 copies, which is the first time any Sierra game has done so well. So this propelled Sierra even further forward. So in 1991, they launched something called the Sierra Network. Ironically, another story. The Sierra Network is where I would meet the woman who would eventually become my wife, who I'm still married to, and she's in the living room, probably listening to one of her audiobooks. The Sierra Network was very, very expensive. Very, very expensive. So it had like an hourly fee that was really ridiculous. It also had a monthly fee that was super ridiculous. But it was so popular. And now someone else has basically recreated from scratch, basically Imagination, or In, as it was called also. And so if you look up In Barn, maybe I'll do a video and show it on here, kind of show what it does. Not all the things work, like mailboxes and stuff like that don't work on the In Barn and stuff like that. And there's a few areas that don't work, but it is pretty much a great recreation of the original Sierra Network or Imagination, or In, as it was called. So if you want to check it out, check out In Barn in Google. I think it's just inbarn.com. Like I said, I'll try to play a little video, kind of segue into that as well. But Sierra didn't stop there. So they're just kicking down doors or making incredible games left and right. And then what they would do next, they would basically recruit Jane Jensen, who would come in to create Gabriel Knight. Now, if you've never played any of the Gabriel Knight games, as much as I hate to say it, basically stop this video and go purchase it on GOG or whatever your preference is and play Gabriel Knight 1, 2, and 3. They are incredible games through and through. Gabriel Knight was the reason that I became super interested in New Orleans and basically voodoo and stuff like that. So I ended up going out to New Orleans, and I ended up meeting someone else who I had known from the Sierra forums, and she and I became actually really good friends as a result of that. So definitely recommend playing Gabriel Knight, because the game, so you have to imagine like Sierra's on top of the world. So they get Mark Hamill to voice one of the characters in the first Gabriel Knight, and he returns in the third. And then they also got, and if you don't know who Mark Hamill is, it's Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, among other things. But they also got Tim Curry to basically voice Gabriel Knight in the first and third one. And if you don't know who Tim Curry is, I don't know what to tell you. He's Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Muppet Treasure Island, he was in Legend, he was a bunch of different movies. Tim Curry is extremely famous and happens to star in one of my all-time favorite movies, Clue. So in 1995, Sierra continued just to keep doing incredible stuff. They made a FMV, which is a full motion video game, that was horror, which was Phantasmagoria, and it was made by none other than Roberta Williams. So Roberta Williams, who made these King's Quest games, which were very, they're based kind of like in fantasy and, like old stories like Hansel and Gretel and stuff like that. There's references to that. There's a Dracula in there and stuff like that. So it's got a bunch of old lore, and Phantasmagoria is basically a horror game that takes place in reality. So, it's a real world, it's modern day, and it's a horror, and it's full motion video, and it is incredible. And ironically, Roberta Williams said at the time, I don't know if her rework of Colossal Cave has taken over that, but at the time she said it was one of her favorite games to work on. So that's pretty incredible. So how does all this tie to what I started talking about 11 minutes ago with BC Quest and the game that me and my friend Sean were dreaming of doing that would make us, developers at Sierra? Well, Sierra at the time was doing a bunch of those Quest kind of games back in 1990. So you had King's Quest, Police Quest, Heroes Quest, later changed to Quest for Glory, Space Quest. There was even like ones about the environment, like Echo Quest. You had like Legends of, like Conquest of Camelot, Conquest of Longbow. They even had like murder mysteries with the Colonel's Bequest. So technically the word quest is in the Colonel's Bequest. So you had all these games. So my friend Sean and I thought, what haven't they covered yet? What hasn't Sierra done a game for that we can do a Quest game for? Write it up, create it, send it to them as a proposition of like, we have this idea, we'd love to work with you. We thought prehistoric. It's the one thing they haven't covered yet, is like prehistoric. So Sean and I started scribbling down ideas, and we had a board and we were drawing stuff out like on this map, and we even had this huge whiteboard that Sean's father let us have. And we were doing, basically, if you've ever looked at any of the Sierra hint books, they have like the little square with arrow, and you kind of see how the map works just by all these squares connecting. And Sean and I were doing the same thing on this huge whiteboard. So we had this big whiteboard where we're drawing out the map. We had these big white pieces of paper that we got at whatever local store, and we're drawing the maps on there and saying, putting notes on the map also. And as we continue to develop it, like, we thought, we're doing pretty good here. Like, we've got a pretty good idea. And we took the map and then put it into, at the time, I think it was Microsoft Paint. And that's where we're drawing like our little squares. And like, once we had a more official laid out map of how everything would work, the main character, as we were thinking about it, like, we want something that would be fun to say, or, still kind of sound like a human name. So we actually came up with Duh Ugg. So his first name was Duh, D-U-H, and his last name was Ugg. And so it was naturally going to be pronounced Doug, but the irony would be everyone would basically say, hey, Duh, come here, or something like that. So that was going to be, his name was Doug. And then his father's brother, who ventured out, his name was Uggle, so it's uncle. So it's his brother's, get it? So it's his uncle, Uggle. Anyway, he had ventured out beyond, like, this is how the game was going to start, is like his uncle had already left and ventured out beyond, what was known to cavemen. And he basically sends a note back saying, I found some incredible stuff and you have to come here. And in our game, the BC of the title wasn't going to stand for like before Christ or anything like that. What it would stand for was before civilization. So the game starts in prehistoric times. So Doug is doing a couple things in prehistoric times. He's avoiding things and he's gathering things and stuff like that before he gets this note from his uncle saying, hey, follow this map I've given you. Come find what I found because it's incredible. And what happens is he ends up taking this map and, after he gathers all he needs to go on this quest, he goes out. And as he's crossing this huge frozen lake, because it is prehistoric times, everything's frozen back then. And we were going to mix things that obviously were not accurate. So we were going to have dinosaurs existing at the same time that Doug was, which would not be historically accurate, but it'd be funner because we'd have like a T-Rex and, other dinosaurs we could show off during the prehistoric parts of the game. And so when he crosses this basically frozen lake, he ends up falling through and getting frozen, and he basically resurfaces in 1990, and they're able to thaw him out, and now he's this prehistoric guy in 1990 trying to figure out what to do. And so we had this whole question. We even created a second, we had a sequel all planned out. We're like, here's how the first one ends, here's how the second one's going to pick up from that. And so we ended up sending it to Sierra, and we actually surprisingly got a reply. And it was crushing, but it was also cool. Because what we did not know is that Sierra was the one who made BC's Quest for Tires. And they essentially said, hey, this is too close to already, this comic strip that has this whole legal thing. We've already made a game called BC's Quest for Tires. The title's too close. Something along those lines. I wish I still had those letters, among a bunch of other stuff that I still wish I had that I somehow lost in my moves. There was a bunch of letters that I would write to Interaction Magazine, and Bridget McKenna would write me back, which is why her name is ingrained in my head, because we were writing back and forth all the time. So I had all these letters, all these black and white photos that I can't even find anymore. They're all gone from when I moved. I don't know where they went, and it pisses me off. But anyway, they basically wrote us and said, hey, this looks like an incredible fun game. Keep doing what you're doing, keep being creative, and keep trying, do what you can. So obviously that dream got crushed, and that went away. But all the documents and all that stuff that we created, other than obviously the huge whiteboard that we borrowed from my friend's father and some of those larger posters, I ended up keeping all that. So there was a mug that we made as a promotional little mug. I kept that. I'll show some of the pictures as I'll splice and show some of the pictures. We made a mug that had a picture that I drew of Doug, and then the other side was me and Sean, basically dressed as cavemen, and I'll show those pictures as well, as much as they are embarrassing. I was 20 at the time. I was very young, no beard, no gray, no nothing. So, living the dream back then. So we had that mug, we had all these cool pictures. We took a number of different pictures too. So Sean at the time he was learning electric guitar. So he had a few of them. So what we did is we took a few pictures because we were rock stars, because, caveman, rock stars. And that was going to be a part of Doug's story too, that he was a rock star. There's pictures of my dog with, that's another thing. We took this sheet that we had and I drew, I think it was he and I basically drew the Sierra logo on this white sheet. And then we wrote BC Quest with this logo thing. And so we're holding up that sheet, and I have a picture of my dog at the time, or technically my mom's dog, basically in front of that sheet. There's a bunch of pictures. There's the box, all this stuff that we did to make it legit. I even created a manual for it. I'll show pictures of all these scans so you guys can see it, but it was pretty fun. The box art and the manuals and all that stuff, I still have in this box that I designed way back in the day. So this, I don't know if it's going to show, but it looks like the art I drew on here was from 11/4/1990. Kind of hard to see maybe, but we even took I took the strip off of one of my extra copies of Sierra game, put it on here. We did a little side thing, so BC Quest and BC Quest. So we went all out when we did this. And the back has like, hey, some stuff that you enjoyed. Like, this will be more clear when I share. There's a picture of me holding the discs, dressed as a caveman. That's one of the photos. And there's my friend Sean. But in thinking like what games they had covered, it made me think of our attempt to make BC Quest. And I thought, I could have sworn I'd already shared something about making BC Quest and our attempt to get hired by Sierra, but when I looked through my channel videos, I couldn't find it. I would assume that it would have been like one of the thumbnails and super easy and super obvious to see, but I could not find it. So I thought, if it already exists, that's fine. Here's a second version of it, of me with no green screen. You can see all my, you can see my studio or my man cave, whatever you want to call it, behind me. What was something else that I was going to talk about? Oh, so one of the things I talked about is always writing to interaction. So I think I talked about this part already, but I used to write to interaction all the time. And as I said, go back and forth with Bridget McKenna, and I would draw stuff similar to that to submit to the Sierra Interaction magazine, or the Sierra magazine at the time. It was both. And it was a lot of fun because, like, I think one of my comic strips got posted. I can't remember. I think. But there was a lot of back and forth. And one of the cool things is I sent in a picture of me attempting to dress like Loose Shoot Larry, leaning on my Tandy 1000 with a empty wine glass in my hand and a bunch of Loose Shoot Larry games around me. And then a idea of a Loose Shoot Larry game called like Beach Babes and Bikinis or something like that. I'll post the picture that I sent to them. They sent me an email back saying, hey, we really like this picture. We would like to use it now because you kind of inspired us to create a Loose Shoot Larry contest to see who can dress like Loose Shoot Larry. And they asked for permission to basically edit the photo. And I said, yeah, of course, do what you will. The fact that I'd be in Interaction magazine, I thought was really cool. And so, sure enough, they photoshopped it and put it in a issue of Interaction magazine, or the Sierra News magazine back then. And I'll share that picture too, so you can see what they took and then what they made out of the edit. One of the other cool things is that back when the Sierra.com went away and Vivendi basically sold it out, I made a website called LarryLafford.net. Still exists. You can go to it. It has a ton of information. Basically focused on all the games that Lowe made. And there were a few of us. We all kind of did different games. So like another guy named Andrew, he kind of made a general SierraHelp.com site that has all these installers and how to get all these games working. Rudy made the Sierra Chest. A few other people made games focused on different stuff. I think of the individual games, like someone made Police Quest, someone did Gabriel Knight. I think mine might be the only one that is still there. I mean, there's the old King's Quest sites that are still out there. But anyway, so I made this Larry Laffer site, and before doing so, I wanted to make sure that Lowe was cool with me doing this. So I had reached out to Lowe on Lowe's website, which is outlow.com, and I said, hey, this is what I want to plan to do. I want to basically take pictures. I want to use some of the text and stuff like that. Is it okay? And I'm sure probably it would be with Vivendi or whoever was going to own Larry Laffer as a copyright or trademark, whatever. But I reached out to Lowe and he said, yeah, by all means, please do it. It'd be great. And send me the link when it's all done. And so I'd done so. And over time, I just kept updating the site, making it cleaner, cooler, and easier to navigate. And so as a result, Lowe and I stayed in contact back and forth every so often. It's not like we wrote every day or anything like that. It'd probably be maybe once a year back then. And so what was cool is I was at the time also creating a machinima series. The machinima series is where you take a video game, take control of the characters, and create your own story, basically, and typically voice over it and move the characters how you need to tell your story. And so that's what I did. And so I was creating a series called Never Ending Nights with my friend Adam. And Adam and I wrote season 1, I wrote season 2, and then we took a big break between season 2 and season 3, and I thought, well, I'm just going to wrap it up. So normally we had originally planned for 7 seasons for this show that we're writing, but we took such a huge break. People had moved and all this stuff, and it was getting harder for us to basically stay in contact with the people we were using for voice actors. And so when I wrote season 3, I was like, I'm gonna go all out on this thing. So one of the things I did is I also, at the time, was running a fan site for ToeJam and Earl. So I reached out to Greg Johnson, who's one of the creators of ToeJam and Earl, and I was like, hey, I would love to have your voice in the show that I'm doing. He agreed. And I reached out to Al Lowe and said, hey, Al, this is like the final season of the show that I do. I would love to have your voice in there. And he agreed. And so in season 3 of the show, I have a number of voice actors that were very special to me in some way, like my childhood heroes, like Greg Johnson and Al Lowe. And so it was great to be able to include them on that. And hearing that line from Al Lowe that says, this is Al Lowe, and I'm reading the lines for Neverending Nights, it was like shivers down my spine, because I thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
Hi, this is Al Lowe, and I'm recording Neverending Nights, episode 55, All-Time Low.
Anyway, this video was supposed to be a quick, short video of me just talking about a little bit of Sierra history, and then about how that ties into my own childhood dream of making BC Quest. And now I'm looking at roughly 26 minutes. It'll probably be a little bit longer once I inject all the photos. So I'll stop here and I'll inject the photos and that other stuff now.